Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Warren Kinghorn. I'm a psychiatrist and theological ethicist at Duke and co-director of the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative. And it's my incredible pleasure to welcome to our seminar today my friend and colleague and conversation partner over the years, Dr. Kurt Thompson. I want to briefly introduce Dr. Thompson, and then we're going to be in conversation together. Kurt Thompson is a board-certified psychiatrist, author, speaker, co-host of the Being Known podcast. He's been in private practice for over 30 years in Falls Church, Virginia, graduated from Wright State University's Boonshoft School of Medicine, and completed his psychiatric residency at Temple University Hospital. He strives to help patients develop flourishing lives by telling their stories more truly in order to become more deeply known, to create beauty and goodness in the world. And we're going to be talking about that today. With conviction and humor, he trains clinicians and speaks at workshops, retreats, and conferences, integrating neuroscience, human relationships, and Christian faith. And I'll just say, I've so appreciated over the years, not only my relationship with Kurt, but also his books. And I just want to recommend to you his 4 books. The first is called Anatomy of the Soul. The second is called The Soul of Shame, which I have to say was, reading that was probably the first time that I'd ever thought deeply about shame and how it operates in our lives. And it's really been transformational to me. The third is called The Soul of Desire. And the fourth and most recent is called The Deepest Place, Suffering and the Formation of Hope. How does our suffering, what does our suffering have to do with our hope, and what do both have to do with the good news of Jesus? It's really an honor, Kurt, that you're here with us. Thank you so much for being here with us on the TMC seminar. And I'm just thrilled that we get to be in conversation together. So thank you.
Warren, it's a pleasure as always, not just to be here, but as we both said to each other on multiple occasions, it's always a joy to just be in the room with each other, and for me to hear your voice. It's such a delight. So thank you so much. It's humbling, and it's a real honor to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope it's not too much to say that your daughter also graduated from Duke Divinity School. So we share
right.
some link there. And I'm really grateful for that as well. So thank you very much.
Right on.
So we're going to frame this as a conversation today with, I have some questions for you, Kurt, about your work and about your thoughts. And then we'll open it up to the group for conversation as we get toward the end of the hour, if that's all right with you. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. It's always really good to be in conversation with you. And many people, including many people I think on this call, are familiar with your writing and speaking. I think it's fair to say you have become a preeminent Christian public intellectual in the world of mental health and theology. But before that, you're a full-time practicing psychiatrist. And I wonder if you could just tell us a bit of your own story, like what led you into medicine and then what led you into psychiatry.
Well, thanks for that question. I think there is a part of me that could say, oh, there's a 30-minute answer to this question, and I won't belabor this. But I think suffice to say that developmentally for me, I found myself in medical school after undergraduate, but was quite ambivalent about it. It was a kind of a bit of a natural course of events that led me there. And there's a story behind that. But I think what is important is that I was in medical school for the first 2 years and really unsure about my place there. I wasn't really sure that that's really what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until third-year clerkship with psychiatry, which I would have to say, I mean, I even thought about dropping out of med school because there were other things that were really calling to me and interesting to me, and I didn't have a certain passion. There were things that I loved about things that I studied in medical school. When I was in clerkships, I loved surgery, OB, other things. I just didn't want to be a surgeon. I didn't want to be an OB practitioner. Deeply appreciated all of the work that people were doing in those fields, and psychiatry at that point had really only ever been a distant awareness to me. It was one of the 6 clerkships that we were going to take, and I knew I was going to need to check that box. I did not see it coming for me. I've often said to people that Jesus has been finding me in many different ways in many different times in my life, and I think that one of the ways that he did find me was in the course of psychiatry, where things that I was, I could effectively, I was able to do the science But this is where I suddenly was awakened to passion. I was awakened to, oh my goodness, my long-standing questions within my own heart about like, why do we do what we do? Who are we as human beings? All those kinds of existential questions that, in many respects, also were not easy for me. Were painful journeys. All these kinds of things that were suddenly, oh my goodness, here's a space where this is a space where I could begin to really do some work in this. And then the question became uh, if I'm going to practice psychiatry, and I want to be, and I'm a believer, how do I draw these things together? And I remember I was in my end of my third year, and I had an encounter with a woman who at the time was the director of medical education at Emory University, who was trained as a pediatrician. I was having a conversation with her about these questions that were in my mind about psychiatry and being a person of faith. And she said, if I hadn't been a pediatrician, I would have been a psychiatrist. And perhaps part of why you have these questions is because we don't yet really have a clear model of what does it mean to be a person of faith and be a practitioner of psychiatry. And somebody really needs to be in this field to develop what this model is. Wink, wink. And there was this felt sense of me being like the Holy Spirit is like talking to me in
Mm.
this conversation, not a common thing that I have. And so found myself being encouraged and almost commissioned in that conversation to enter
Mm.
into this. And so entered into the psychiatric residency training program at Temple, where now I've got a new question of like, what are people going to think about me being a believer? And,
Mm.
in a world in which, in psychiatry, it's not a very common thing. Often all these kind of stereotypical thoughts about faith that are rather sometimes can be pejorative and somewhat contemptuous. So at least this is the story that was in my head. And I found at the Temple program that I had other colleagues, other resident friends who were really quite open. And even though they weren't believers, they were really quite kind and open to these conversations. And then eventually made my way to Washington, D.C., where I started in a practice where there were other believers, which was really transformational. And in fact, David Larson, former Duke professor, was significant in my journey at that point. And then it was about 20 years ago where after about being in practice for about 15 years, encountered the work of Dan Siegel. These are the early days of interpersonal neurobiology, and from there has come my sense that one of the things that we read about in the text, when we read in Romans 1:20, that from the very beginning we've learned about God's nature and His power by looking at creation. And with interpersonal neurobiology, we are being exposed to more ways of understanding the nature of how the creation works when it comes to the development of the mind, what the mind is, and how we operate, and so forth. And so, in the last 20 years, it has been an exciting journey. I have never been more excited, even right now. I've never been more excited about the work in the field of neuroscience and the intersection of spiritual formation. And I have never been more hopeful about the gospel. Not least of which, because, I mean, for example, like this call that we're having right now today, I have the joy of having a conversation with one of my favorite colleagues on the planet, because we get to co-labor together to hopefully, with humility, bear witness in our particular field to what the gospel is really getting at. And that is to turn us into turn us into professional human beings, as it were. We're practicing for heaven. We are renewing our minds by the power of the Holy Spirit. And as it turns out, we have neuroscience evidence now that I wouldn't say prove it, but we have neuroscience evidence now that is highly correlated with this and that supports the notion that what God is doing in what we read about in the text is also showing up in between my ears, in my brains, in our bodies. That things are being renewed, and this is giving us a hint of what's coming.
Yeah. I, I want to ask you more about all of this, including attachment and interpersonal neurobiology and theology. But I just want to echo first that you're talking about the importance of encouragers and mentors.
Oh,
That conversation that you had was really important. And
oh
I
yeah.
think I have conversations in my own experience as a medical student where it was psychiatrists who were able to say, you can do this, you can be a Christian
Hmm.
in this field, and actually it's
Yeah,
quite beautiful,
yeah.
and you can. I think of Dr. John Petit for me, and there was
Ah,
retired chair of psychiatry at Mass General when I was in medical school, who was also a Jesuit priest. And I just remember sitting in his office, and he said to me something on the order of, to be able to be with a person and to be able to focus on them not as a collection of organ systems, but as a person with a story is
Mm,
an incredible privilege.
mm,
And
mm.
I've just never forgotten that. So
That's so true.
I feel the privilege of this field that we're in, as well as all of us in any kind of healthcare.
Right.
And I want to ask you about that. My experience of being a psychiatrist, we've trained and worked in different places, is that we often focus our attention on the problems or the
Hmm.
symptoms with which people present to us, and we try to
Hmm.
fix those. So
Hmm.
we label, we name, we
Hmm.
intervene, we try to fix.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you point out something very important, that rather than focusing primarily on problems, we should be focusing on the person in front of us, and
Hmm.
specifically a person who's made in the image of God.
Hmm.
So I guess most broadly, help me understand, when a person comes to see you, like
Hmm.
what or whom do you see?
Hmm. Well, for our listeners, Warren, I think, yeah, the first thing I want to say, because I don't want to forget to say it, is that as I've said to you already on a number of occasions, the book that you have most recently written and published, Wayfaring, uh, is the book I've been waiting for about 8 years, that I think helps, that reflects a number of things that I'm gonna say here. But I would love for our listeners, if you don't know about it, if you haven't heard about it, if you haven't read it, then I by all means I would love for our listeners to read the book that you've most recently published. I think one of the other things that it's important for us to recognize, and I don't know, different systems of medical education might do this differently, but I think we have to recognize that science is not in a position to answer the question, what is a human being?
Mm,
And I think you get at this directly in your book. And I think this is, we would say that who we are as human beings, those are questions. That is a question that is answered by somebody else, by something else in our world. That's
mm,
answered. That is answered by, first of all, by answering the question, in what story do we believe that we're living? If I believe I'm
mm,
living in a story in which I'm just a brain on a stick, if
mm,
I'm kind of reductionistic, if I can be reduced to a materialist, a non-theistic materialist way of seeing the world,
mm,
then okay, then that's what I am, and I can just see people as a collection of symptoms, and I check the boxes in the DSM, and then we go on to the next. Like I just see an inflamed gallbladder, and that's all that I'm looking at. Or like I see a car that, has this particular problem with its carburetor or with its electrical system, and we fix it. But like I don't have the car. The car isn't just a collection of electronics and metal to be fixed. I buy a car because I want it to take me places. That car isn't just a place that we built it just to have a place to put gasoline. I want to drive that car. I want to enjoy that car. That car's going someplace. We are something other than that, but that's not a question that science answers. This is answered by other sources, and we who have been introduced to the shocking story of Jesus, we are then have to contend. Oh, this is a story that might answer that question. And if that's the story we're going to contend with, that's the story that I'm going to receive, then I will, where do I go? And that's the first 2 pages of the Bible. And I don't then just look at a person as a collection of symptoms. I meet all the criteria for ADD, or I meet all the criteria for panic disorder, or for major depression, or for even for bipolar disorder. I am wanting to look as a practitioner. I want to see beyond that. I don't want, I'm not looking at that. Of course, we're looking
mhm,
at those things. We are looking at those. When somebody comes in with a fever, when somebody comes in with a white blood cell count that's, at 20,000, right? We're looking at that. But I don't just want to fix the problem. That's not what you are. I want to envision you as an artifact of beauty that is being revealed.
mm, mm,
We are in the business. I mean, this is Genesis chapter 1 and 2. We are in the business of creating and curating beauty and goodness in the world. And part of our challenge is, as clinicians, is that we are formed by systems that, without explicitly doing so, train us, and not just in medical school. It started in undergrad. No, it started in high school. No, it starts in middle school. This sense that we are machines, as you so beautifully write about in your book. And then that's not, and the gospel would say, the Bible would say, actually, not, no, we're not. We are image bearers. We are
Mm.
living, breathing, pulsating, relational icons who's who've been made to become kings and queens, who've been made to rule, who've been
Mm.
made to curate the things that we have created, while we are also
Care,
being that.
yeah, and care and
So,
cultivate and be part of part of
yeah,
God's creation.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I've really learned a lot over the years from the way that you as a psychiatrist are kind of thinking about Genesis 1 to 3,
Mm,
and you just got into this. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you found this resonance between attachment and
mm.
interpersonal neurobiology, and who we are as, like, as creatures of dust who grow in relationship. And I know
Yeah.
you've talked before about the four S's, and I'd love for you to
Mm.
kind of, help us to think about how does that relate both to who we are as human beings, but also who we are before God.
Yeah. Well, I think again, if we begin with the story and we have to decide, well, which story am I going to believe? And we say, like, I'm choosing to enter into and to believe the story that we read about in the first two pages of the Bible. We can read that and we can see that the text would indicate that I'm made as a relational creature. Let us make mankind in our image. This plurality, like, I'm our image, male and female. He made us. Like, I only know who I am because there's somebody else in the world. I don't get
Mm,
to know who I am by myself. And not only that, we get to the second page and there's this sense that, and he took the mud and he formed the human.
mm,
And then he breathed the breath of life, that we are mud and we are breath. And there is a sequence. It's not
mm,
that one is more important than the other, but there is a sequence to this. We start with mud, we start with our bodies. And then he commissions us, male and female. The man and his wife were naked and unashamed, and they're on the precipice, they're on the verge of going into their work together as a one flesh union. This sense of differentiation and linkage in the absence of shame. This sense that there is also a way to create beauty and goodness in the world. And that is in a differentiated, like, I'm not just different from females and males, but like, I'm a Northern European and I'm connected to my African American folks and my Asian American folks. Like culturally we're different. Like, we need to create beauty with others who are different from me. I need
mm,
that. And if I'm going to do it in that way, I also must do it in the absence of shame. I
mm,
want to create in the absence of shame. And this is the story that we tell. And then lo and behold, we start to witness what we learn about in interpersonal neurobiology. And
mm,
we have what I would call, not this is the science is not the proof of these things that we read in the text. We want to be careful about that. It's not proving things. We want to say it has high correlation with things. And what do we learn about that in interpersonal neurobiology? We say that the mind is an embodied and relational phenomenon. We are mud and we are breath. And this requires this intersection of relationality that enables me to emerge, right? We're not packaged and wrapped, right? The first woman and man in Genesis 2, they were emergent power. They were not fully mature. They were infants. They were immature. They were naive to things. And this is, of course, what puts them at risk, but it is God takes us so seriously that he wants us to grow into things.
mm.
This is risky. Like we say, look, the only way you're not going to mess up your kids is just don't have them, right? If you're going to have
True.
children, I mean, you're a father. If you're
I
going to
am.
have children, like, you're going to have trouble.
Yeah,
You're going
that's
to
right.
get anxious. These things because because why? They are going to have stories of their own. They're going to tell they're going to be on their own to tell their story. And you're like, no,
Yeah,
I look, I have children who are 34 and 31, and I still want to be in charge of
yeah,
that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's an
yeah.
emergent process, and lo and behold, this is what attachment tells us, that for
Mm,
me to flourish in the world, I need to be seen.
yeah.
This is true for newborns. This is true for 70-year-olds. I need to be seen. And where I am seen in my vulnerability and my woundedness and my hurt, I need to be soothed. And that soothing, after being seen, leads to me developing a sense of safety. And by safety, it's not just a matter of, like, I'm fully protected from all hurt. It doesn't mean that I will never be hurt. It means that I am comfortable and confident, but I'm not just safe from things that are outside my skin. This is parenting doesn't just help children help protect children from the outside. That's true. But they also have to protect children from themselves. My 2-year-old is bound to run into the street.
Yeah.
My 14-year-old is bound to do things, perhaps impulsively. So I'm having to also teach them restraint.
Mm.
And this is, culturally for us, this is, yeah, of course I want to be protected from anything that's outside of me that's bad, but please let me do whatever I want to do. Don't put any restraints. And this is hard. So I want to be seen, soothed, and made to be safe in order for me to then be secure. And by secure, meaning I now am comfortable and confident enough to leave the confines of my home where things are safe and go into the world,
Mm.
into the wilderness. This is right. This is Genesis 1 and 2 as well. They were commissioned to extend the Eden blessing into the wilderness.
Yeah.
And this is what we are doing as believers. We are creating outposts of beauty and goodness in the wilderness. And that means that I might get my feelings hurt, and I'm going to get my nose bloodied and my knee scratched. And like people are going to, relationships are going to have ruptures that we are then going to need to repair. All these kinds of things. And what do?
Mhm.
They create opportunity, even for more beauty and goodness to be created in the last places we might imagine them being created, which is in
Mm.
effect a direct reflection of the gospel.
Yeah.
Jesus
Yeah.
comes to create beauty and goodness. Right? He doesn't, right? He says, like, I didn't come. The physician doesn't come for those who are well.
Yeah.
He's coming to the places that are sick. And this is where we
Mm.
see this, for me, this beautiful, resonant conversation that's taking place between the biblical text and God's additional way of showing us his word by how we have been created in the terms of the mechanics of interpersonal neurobiology and attachment science that indicates that, yes, to be attached fully to one another is a direct reflect, is also one of the most powerful ways in which we reflect what it means to bear and to share the image of God.
Yeah. I love that. And I mean, so to be seen, to be soothed, to be safe, which means to be protected, but not to be overprotected, to be,
Right.
to be nurtured, allows for a
Right.
security that allows us to be explorers and agents.
Right.
And that is going to involve injury and wound, and inevitably
That's
will
right.
in our world. So you've talked about these kind of four S's that are maybe the psychological foundations of ourselves, of ourselves as agents and explorers. How does shame get in the way of that? Like, how does shame come into the
Mhm.
picture?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say, because this is a question that is often asked, is to say, well, I wouldn't want anyone to assume that my sense is that shame, in and of itself, is just only a bad thing.
Mhm.
Um, I want to invite us to consider that shame is part of the signaling system that has been built into the creation from the beginning.
Mhm.
And there are things that people do for which shame is absolutely the proper response. In fact, there are probably lots of things that are taking place in our world today in which people are not feeling shame for things for which they should.
Mhm.
And their
Yeah.
behavior is therefore not deterred. And
Yeah.
that's problematic at a whole range, in a whole range of different ways.
Mhm.
Our problem with shame is not so much that we experience it, it is how we respond to it under particular circumstances. And what we see that takes place again in the Genesis account, first of all, is that shame starts to show up very early in the story. They don't wait until the middle of Genesis to name it. They name it right in the very beginning, long
Yeah.
before anything like nefarious is happening. They were naked and unashamed. Why did the Hebrew writers say they were naked and confident, they were naked and adventuresome, they were naked in all a range of different things that they could have naked and unashamed. It gives us a signal for what's coming.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think what we discover even and the writers are so brilliant that we without because they don't name the word shame in the third chapter, but they let us know that something is afoot. And I would invite the reader of the third chapter to consider that shame actually shows up just by virtue of what you start to see in the story, long before any fruit gets eaten by Adam and Eve. And this notion of what shame is, we would say, even without any kind of biblical narrative involvement, what we discover shame to be, first of all, is a neurophysiologic event. Before I can understand, like, that I feel it because somebody said something to me. I'm sensing it literally in my body. And it is a disintegrating event. Alan Shore, a neuropsychologist at UCLA, likes to describe, relationships as being that are connecting. Well, we've got and newborns and toddlers are in the world, and they're in go mode, right? They have an accelerator, the sympathetic drive system of the brain. And we also have a braking system. We have a parasympathetic drive system. But in any standard transmission automobile engine, we need to have a clutch as well, because if the engine decelerates without the use of a clutch, the engine stops violently. And what Shore likens shame to is what happens when we are in go mode and the engine decelerates, right? Someone says something to you, or someone does not affirm you or ignores you when you need that. We decelerate in the absence of a clutch, and essentially saying that the clutch is an attuned human relationship. And so we have this jarring effect that we feel, even with the slightest kinds of things. You're at a cocktail party and you're having conversation with 2 or 3 other people, and you say something and there's silence. Nobody responds. Like nobody's saying to you, Kurt, that was stupid. They don't have to. I feel it right here.
Mhm.
We feel this. And I stop talking. I don't want to say the next thing, and so
Yeah,
forth.
and retreat, like draw in,
Oh,
retreat, look
I
down.
retreat,
Yeah,
and I retreat from you
yeah.
in the same way that there are different parts of my mind that are retreating from within themselves. So
Mm,
my creative self, my emotional self, from my thinking self, from my embodied self, we disintegrate. This is what shame does.
mm,
And it keeps us, it disintegrates, it decreates our capacity within me. We all have this, we've all had, like, you don't need a psychiatrist to tell you about shame. I mean, like, we all kind of get it.
mm,
But in the same way that it's happening within me, it's also happening between me and you, between me and others. And I think this is one of the reasons why we would say that the text points to it. Because again, one of the most significant outcomes of shame is not just that I feel bad, it's that when I respond to it in this way, without seeing it as a signal that is calling me toward connection, calling me like something's going on, and I need to reconnect with somebody. Instead, I move away from people. What
yeah,
what ends up happening is I stop creating things.
yeah,
Evil is not just on a mission to make us feel bad. Evil finds beauty and creation to be anathema.
yeah.
This is what it cannot tolerate. And if it can just get me to not create with
Mm,
you,
mm,
then it doesn't have to work with me at all. Like, I'm going to do its job for it.
mm,
And
mm,
so we also see that in the text of Scripture, how often is the notion of shame associated with the conversation about sin? And there's
mm,
this sense that shame is a tightly wrapped, entangled emotional state that is associated with what we call sin. This part of me that turns away from relationship, not just disobedience, not just missing a mark. That is a way to
mm,
describe it as an observer, but
mm.
functionally, it's me turning away from God, me turning away from my fellow humans relationally. And evil will wield shame as a way to address this. And what's so beautiful about the gospel, and what we would say is so beautiful about the work that we get to do, how many you have patients that you work with and you meet with them, and they're just a cauldron of shame sitting in your office. And the
Yeah,
very fact that you are with them is the first step toward healing that, because you're saying to them, no matter how much shame you walk around with, I'm not leaving the room.
mm, mm,
And the coming to you is the answer. This is Jesus coming to us, being with us in our shame in order
yeah,
to, through Good Friday and resurrection, take us out the other side into a place where we get to realize once again that we can do the work that Adam and Eve were intended to do, but had a hard time doing it.
yeah. I mean, it's so powerful. Like, what does it mean to not have to hide and not have to run?
Yeah,
I,
right.
on shame, I've learned not only from you, but also from our former colleague here at Duke, Elaine Heath, who asked the question, what is it like to read Genesis 3 uh, from the perspective of survivors of sexual abuse?
Mhm.
And she points out that the serpent like preys on Eve's and Adam's vulnerability. The serpent
Right.
acts as a kind of groomer in some ways, and
Right. Right.
like betrays their trust and leads them into a cycle where then all of a sudden they're hiding from themselves and from others. It's a profound betrayal of
Right.
trust, and
Right.
and I think the way that shame like gets deep inside of us and like affects our relationships and our communities and everything else is just really powerful. So I
Yeah.
appreciate your calling attention to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I think, this gets to the question of what are we doing in healthcare? This is a seminar where there's a lot of healthcare people gathered.
Yeah. Right.
You speak of healthcare practitioners as institutions of shalom, which is not a word that we've used so far today. So, what do you
Hmm.
mean by shalom?
Hmm.
And how would you invite healthcare students and practitioners here and who maybe
Record.
listen to this later to
All right.
envision
Transit.
themselves as bearers of shalom?
Yeah, the word shalom, when I think about it, it just it reminds me about the limits of language.
Mm,
In some respects, even that word is the Hebrew word that is trying to get to something.
mm,
It is trying to get to a social engagement of beauty and goodness and what is true that we can't even quite get to with words. But it's beyond peaceableness. It is beyond joy. It is this sense of well being, not just for us as individuals, not just between me and you, but for the entire creation. We look around and we see that the world is put to right, this sense of well being and peaceableness and comfort and confidence, as it were, as we were, again, these words fail me. But what we're talking about with practitioners that we are outposts of institutions of shalom is that we want to be a place where, as a non-anxious presence, we are stepping into and inviting the carnage of the world to come into our office. We're inviting the COVID patients, we're inviting the gunshot wound patients, we're inviting the chronic brittle diabetic patients, we're inviting the people with schizophrenia, we're inviting people with depression, we're inviting all. We want to be, first and foremost, people who see beyond just the problems, who see beyond the symptoms, and are moving toward this place of shalom. But it's hard for me to imagine that that's what I'm going to do if I don't have someone who's doing the same thing for me.
mm,
You know,
yeah,
when it was striking to me when when we had the COVID outbreak, and within just a few weeks, even in some cases, but certainly months, we started to see and hear about the uptick in the number in the cases of burnout among healthcare professionals.
yeah.
And I'm not familiar enough with the data, but the one thing that I kept wondering to myself was, I wonder if you're talking about all the folks from the ER physicians to the nursing staff to the intensive care unit folks, all the people in all layers of this,
Mhm.
to the community providers who are out trying to do nursing visits to people who,
Yeah,
are in nursing homes and can't go anywhere.
yeah,
Who's taking care of them?
yeah, yeah,
We can't give what we don't have. And
yeah.
I don't know
Which
what I don't. Yeah,
I was like, yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just say that I think that speaks to the importance of the church for clinicians too, that we're not like self-sufficient, that we're not like little Jesuses ourselves, like healing and saving the world, that we're at best like participating in a broader work that
right,
doesn't start with us, that isn't ultimately up to us, that isn't really primarily even our work, but we get to participate in it. And I think it's
right,
that like seeing ourselves as like part of this much broader movement of healing that is actually
right,
lovely to be able to say, I'm just a small part of things, and that's
right.
all, and that's
Well,
good.
I often say to people, you know it is often the case that the best 75 minutes of my week is between 11:45 and 1 p.m. on Wednesdays,
Mm,
when I'm in the room with 14 other clinicians
mm,
in our staff,
mm,
where we are saying to each other, nobody's leaving the room.
Mm.
We want our staff to know that they are as well cared for
Mm.
as any care they're going to provide downstream to any of the patients that they're going to see between now and next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing like being a physician to reveal how much we think we're the dullest pencil in the box.
Mm.
I mean, I've had the privilege of doing the work I'm doing now for almost 35 years. And Warren, there are still plenty of days when I'm sitting with a patient and I'm thinking, should I be allowed to do this?
I'm glad. I'm glad to know there's someone else who thinks that way. So,
Oh my
yeah, that's
goodness.
right.
Like you
Yeah.
you you reach you reach moments where you are sure that you don't know what to do, or that you or and you are going to be responsible for something tragic happening with this patient.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, I don't know how many surgeons we have who are on this call, but the whole notion of like every time you step to the table or every time you step to the Da Vinci,
Mm.
and of course you want to come with, again, comfort and confidence. You are secure, you're going out into the world, and at the same time, if on our best days, things can go wrong. And it would be nice to pretend that when things go wrong, I'll be fine.
Mm.
And like if that's the only thing that you think, I'm guessing that like there's more to you than you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the
It
point
gets to
being
that
then,
being seen, soothed, safe, and secure
totally,
allows for that to happen in a
totally,
healthy way. Yeah.
totally. Like I want like my idea of my best surgeons are
Mm.
going to be those who are actually able to say out loud when they are afraid of being in
Mm.
the OR.
Mm.
I don't need surgeons who never make mistakes. I don't need surgeons who are only ever confident. It's kind of like, in the major leagues when they say who are the best pitchers? Are the best pitchers who never let anybody on base. And it's like, actually, those pitchers don't exist. Rarely do you have a no
That's
hitter.
right.
The pitcher you want on your team is the
Mm.
pitcher who wants the ball when he's got runners at first and third and nobody out,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? He's walked a batter, he's stolen second, a hit to first has put him at third. Like this is like,
Yeah.
and you're like, I want the ball. Like I want the
Yeah.
sir, I want the one who can say, I'm nervous on the mound.
Yeah. And who can pitch another inning even when there's a grand slam
Right.
in that
All
moment?
the things.
Yeah.
And to which we
Hmm.
say it is in that space where even as healthcare providers, we don't approach what we do as people who know we're perfect. We know we're approaching what we do as people who know that we are loved. And I don't mean that in the abstract. I mean that I have embodied encounters like I do every Wednesday at 11:45 in the morning. I have
Yeah.
embodied encounters that let me know that I am not by myself when my 1 o'clock patient is scaring the living daylights out of me.
Mm. Yeah.
And that means that if I'm less alone, if I am more with, I'm actually less anxious. And
Yeah.
if I'm less anxious, I am more likely to do the next right good thing, even in a
Mm.
hard space.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And my use of that term makes me actually want to ask you about a word that's in your title. And this may be the last question that I ask, and then it's okay. We'll open it up to the group for questions. But in the title of our conversation today, it's Christian Healthcare's Outposts of Beauty and Goodness. And you've talked about this some, but I'd love for you to just talk about why is beauty important to you? That's not a
Mm.
term that came up very often in my psychiatry residency, or that comes up in the patient care directives I get from the
Mm.
VA. Like, why
Mm.
is beauty important for the work that you do, for the work we do in healthcare? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say again, I have been the recipient of a number of people who have opened my eyes to this. Many on our call will be familiar with the work of Makoto Fujimura, a friend of ours. I'm also indebted to the work of Hans Urs von Balthasar, the Catholic theologian, and others. Here's the first thing that I would say in response to that is like we, at least in the West, and for many of us who are not in the business of artistic expression that we know of as our primary day job, um, we typically understand we live in the world as if beauty is a luxury. It's an add-on.
Mm.
And all that we would need to do to disabuse people of this notion would be to say, okay, we're going to get rid of all the beauty in the world.
Mm.
And then let's see what life is like.
Mm.
And suddenly, you discover that just about everything in the world would disappear. Because we are this calloused, this unaware, this naive to the presence of beauty in so many different ways, because we do not notice it. I'm just saying that right off the bat.
Mm.
And then we look at the first page of the Bible and, 7 days of creation, 6 days of creation that we have in Genesis chapter 1. And God gets to the end of just about every day except day 3, and God says, and he saw that it was good. He saw that it was good. And the word for good that is often translated as good in the English language is the Hebrew word that can easily and equally be translated, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. We do not imagine ourselves as icons of beauty. Unless you're typically, rare occasions do males in our culture imagine ourselves as being icons of beauty. Females, that's a whole other kettle of fish, right? Because it can often be abused. Like, but what would it be like for someone to find us at 10 o'clock in the morning and say, I just want to let you know, like, you, you're just the most beautiful creature that I've seen in a while, and I just want to let you know that, and it not be, sexualized or something of that nature. That I just want you to know that that conversation that you just had with your nursing staff, like, was one of the most beautiful things I've heard since I listened to Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto 2 days ago. We this notion of seeing things in life that we are doing that are good, that are right, as artifacts of beauty, we don't imagine it because we have not been trained to imagine it, because we have not been seen ourselves as icons of beauty that are emerging. When God says this in Genesis chapter 1, let's also remember that he's not just creating something and then standing back and observing what he's created. That is part of what's going on. It is also true that the beauty of this thing is emerging as a function of God naming it. Most of us would not imagine that we are becoming beauty, let alone that we are creating beauty, until someone else names it. But when we do, when someone forgives someone, when someone goes the extra mile to stay the extra hour in the ER, when we say to them, oh my goodness, can I just stop you and say thank you? It was just it was a deeply beautiful act of mercy. When we use that language in particular, we begin to awaken to beauty being all kinds of places that we've never
Yeah.
imagined seeing it. And I just want to,
Yeah.
here's the thing. When we as healthcare providers are imagining that beauty is what's going to emerge. This is like Michelangelo with that unfinished block of marble that eventually became the Pietà, right? He's imagining something that most of us cannot imagine. But we get the Pietà because he imagines it in just a block of marble.
Mm.
Somebody's going to imagine something beautiful emerging in a gunshot wound. And you think, well, Kurt, I don't know that beauty is like, we're just trying to save this person's life. You are. But we just also want to say they're not just a machine who you're trying to, like, patch up the gas line that's been broken. You're really wanting to imagine that what you're doing is recommissioning someone to go and create beauty and goodness themselves. But it's hard for them to imagine that if someone isn't naming this for them, like God names it for the creation on the first page of the Bible. And so my longing is for those of us who are in positions who are training other people, for us, first of all, to be looking for beauty and to name it in those terms.
Yeah.
and to train people to be looking for it in the work that they're doing with the people that they're caring for as well. And I think if that's what I'm looking for, as opposed to I'm looking for a problem to solve, it actually goes a long way in reducing my own anxiety, and it enables me to imagine a future
Mm.
that is commensurate with what the kingdom of God is about, that is coming in its fullness.
Yeah. It seems like that requires kind of attention and attentiveness that when
Yeah.
we're so focused on productivity and busyness and efficiency that it's hard to do that. But I
Right.
appreciate that.
Right. I'll just do this one last thing. I'll
Yeah.
say, so
Yeah.
here would be an experiment. This would be an experiment that we could do for our listeners. I would say somewhere in the next week,
Mm.
um, find, look for an event where you see someone doing something,
Mhm.
and imagine for them, imagine what it would be like for you to say, "My goodness, that was just really beautiful what you just did,"
Mm.
and watch what happens. And first of all, they're like, "I'm not sure what you mean,"
Yeah.
and then you persist. You're like, "Yeah, no, that was really beautiful. I watched
Mm.
how you interacted with that 3 month old when you were on rounds.
Mm.
It was a moment of utter beauty.
Mm.
Thank you for doing that because it just really did something for me." Watch what begins to
Mm.
happen when we begin to name things as God named things. On the right, He names these
Yeah.
things. This is what He does, and then He
Yeah.
says, "Let's make humans to do what I do, to do what we do."
Mm. Mm.
And the world begins to take, like, we begin to tell a completely different story. In addition to
Mm.
now being people who I'm less anxious because I'm not seeing the world as a problem that I have to fix, as much as, oh my goodness, I'm co-laboring with Jesus
Yeah.
artistically to do what I was
Yeah.
made to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's open it up to the group for questions. I'm seeing a comment from Janice Irchukwu. I'll just state it. I would encourage you, if you have questions for Dr. Thompson, then either post them in the chat and I'll field them, or if you would like to just raise your hand and then we can go directly you can unmute and show your screen and ask the question directly. We'll get to Janice Irchukwu's comment in just a minute, but I did see a hand raised from Anahi Strader. Would you like to ask your question?
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. It has been beautiful, and I just wanted to ask Dr. Thompson to comment more about shame as a physiologic response. And we know the systemic response and kind of what our circulatory system does, but I wanted for you to speak more about sort of neurocommunication process, like what
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
happens in that forces, not forces, but that moves us into separation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you for the question. Um, the way I usually respond to this is by first, and again, we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but in interpersonal neurobiology, we like to talk about what we call the 9 domains of integration of the mind. This notion that we have consciousness, we have a vertical domain, the body, we have a horizontal domain, the connection between the right and left hemisphere, we have a memory domain, a narrative domain, temporal domain, an interpersonal domain, a state domain, all these different functions of the mind. Now, these are not located. Each one of these is not located in a particular part of the mind. The brain is, well, first of all, the mind is not just limited to the brain, and it's not just limited to the body. It's all of these different systems, and it's also the mind is something between me and you. What we tend to see is that the middle prefrontal cortex, especially the anterior cingulate gyrus, becomes a place where there is great convergence. There's high density of connection between these different functional domains that come together in the middle prefrontal cortex. And what we tend to see functionally is that the middle prefrontal cortex tends to be less engaged. When I am ashamed, I it's hard for me to plan, for instance. When I am ashamed, it's hard for me to pay attention. My dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, on the right side of the brain especially, tends to be less perfused, it's less active. And so, for instance, it's harder for me to pay attention, it's harder for me to be present, it's harder for my awareness of my body and awareness of my thoughts collectively in a symphonic way. That is typically more the case when I am more integrated. When I'm experiencing shame, I tend to I tend to be more actively my brainstem and my limbic circuitry tend to be more active. My amygdala tend to be more active, and the integrated states of emotional regulation tend to be less regulated. In addition, I do tend to physiologically disconnect in distance. I turn my gaze away from you. I will tend to turn my body inward, as you were talking about earlier, Warren. I tend to put distance. And so even there, I am sending signals to others. And this is where we don't probably have all the data that we would love to have and might have it at some point from a quantum mechanics standpoint about how I am communicating visually and even auditorially in ways that are disconnecting me from others. Dan Siegel likes to talk about this thing that we call this river of integration or a state of integration. We tend to be either more chaotic or more rigid in our responses to shame, depending upon the particular event. And I'll just leave it at that for now without getting further into the weeds about particularities of which particular neural networks. But again, to say that our neural networks do not talk to each other as efficiently as they do when we are in states of integration. But again, this is not just to say that this is all shame states. Remember that shame is a signal about something. And sometimes I feel shame for things for which I should feel shame. And then the question becomes, what are those around me doing? What am I doing in response to this? And if those around me come for me, like God came for Adam in Genesis chapter 3, then the question becomes, am I willing to respond to them coming for me to reinstate and move towards states of integration, which are not easy to do? Because just like Adam, I'm more likely to, like, you come for me, I don't really want to have a conversation with you. Because it's too painful to look at my shame when in fact the looking at it is the very thing that I need to do in order to reconnect, to reintegrate, not just with you, but within my own mind.
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge Janice's comment that I don't think we need to respond to. It just says our participation in lives is such a gift. Many clinicians, I guess, would fail to recognize great is the responsibility to care for others and truly understand the impact we have or potentially have on the well-being of others with intrinsic value as image bearers.
Yeah.
Let's turn to Jeremiah.
Okay. Can I say one thing about this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the one thing, and this is getting at stuff that's part of this next book work that I'm in the foothills of working on. I just want to say, to all of our clinicians, but to all of our listeners, I just want to say, I want you to know that you have no idea how big a deal your presence, just your presence, your being in the room and your attunement to people is the beginning of their healing. I want you to know that long before you give them your information, long before you give them your surgical intervention, long before you drop the IV, long before you put the art line in, your very attunement to them is the thing that they're looking for, and they don't even know that they're looking for it. Long before you bring them the thing you're going to do, the most important thing that you're going to bring them is you. And I want you to know that with great joy and with great delight and with being able to exhale, that you're walking in the room. You become the image bearer that says, help is here.
Yeah. I so appreciate that, Kurt. And it's not just physicians. I remember a few years ago when I was in the ER for several nights with my wife with a medical condition, and the means of grace in those nights came through a CNA nursing assistant who just showed incredible kindness. And I think she was she was where grace came forth in that
mm,
time. So,
mm, mm, mm.
Jeremiah, you've been waiting to ask your question. I invite you to do so.
I would wait all day. I feel like Dr. Thompson, that was just a benediction, man.
Mm,
I can't be thankful enough for that.
mm, mm,
I'm actually sitting in the back room of a trauma center, super
mm,
busy trauma center on the East Coast, and
mm,
I'm an ER
mm,
resident myself. And
mm, mm,
your examples, I started typing out a question, regarding the conversation about beauty. And you actually just chose to use some examples from things that I was thinking about, like the
mm,
exact
mm,
situations and scenarios I was running through, because there's so much darkness in
mm,
places like this. And
mhm, mhm,
Dr. Kinghorn, if you spent some time in an ER as a family member, just yesterday I sat with my best friend who actually had to be hospitalized and just watched him suffer through the day.
mm,
And
mm,
you're right, it's those little blips of kindness
mm,
that
mm,
behold God's glory and love in those moments. And I
mm,
I think that the overwhelming reality I was realizing, though, for anyone in the space that's going into those moments is,
mhm.
like, for us, it can be so hard to recharge your beauty lens, because
Right,
you come into a
right,
place like that inundated with suffering, and
right,
actually just so many people experiencing shame, and so many
right,
people experiencing evil, that has just created this disconnect interpersonally,
right,
where we see people as symptoms. In biology, we don't see them as image bearers worthy of love.
right.
Like, how do we recharge
Mm,
that lens? And
mm.
I have so many more comments, but I'm going to hold them for the sake of
All
time.
right.
And I'm extremely
Yeah.
grateful for
Yeah,
the conversation here. It's awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Let me interject. Thank you, Jeremiah. We're almost at the end of our time. Terry, it's good to see you. Do you want to ask a question as well? And then we'll give you the last word, Kurt, to respond to
Mm.
both. Did you have a question, Terry?
Yeah, I was really touched that you put beauty and shame together. As Dostoevsky said, beauty can save the world.
Mm,
And I think that's true because it reminds us of our soul.
mhm,
And as you said, being present and being there for someone also reminds them of their worthiness,
mhm,
and
mhm,
that the soul is our immortal beauty that's
mhm,
within
mhm,
us,
mhm,
that
mhm,
we connect with. So
mhm, mhm,
whatever he wanted to say about putting those
mm.
two together, it's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
beautiful
yeah,
juxtaposition.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thanks for that reflection, Terry. Jeremiah, I mean, one thing I just want to speak about this is that um, we want to be practitioners who are really good at what we do. We want to come with the knowledge of what we have to deliver. And I know that if you're in a trauma center you're in a trauma center, then the speed with which you have to deliver what you're being asked to deliver does not give you much time to pause and take a breath and reflect and say, oh, that's right. I'm an object of beauty, looking for beauty in the world. Like, dude, like you like, where's there the time to think about this when you're like trying to keep track of labs and trying to get the chest tube in and all the things that you have to do. And so I and so I just want to acknowledge first of all with the comment that you said that you're being in a really dark place, like that we're working in places where there's lots and lots and lots of really painful things, and to acknowledge that that's really hard to be in, and and it's in that it's because of that. Like, so you're going into like you're looking for beauty in like the last place people would find. Like, if it's like, hey, where are the top 10 places in the States that we would like look for beauty? They're like, um, I think Baltimore shock trauma ER. I think that's number two on my list, right after the Philadelphia Museum of Art. That's where I'm going to go. Like, this is what I mean when I say that we need others in our lives who are regularly pouring into us, who are helping us remember this, because there will be not just hours, there will be days where we will feel like we're going when we are like we are in the cockpit of a fighter of a fighter, like, and we're just being taken shrapnel. And so there is no question, therefore, that it is imperative that we have space for which we are set aside to receive the very same care that you're giving to someone. We cannot give what we do not have. Your tank will eventually become empty, and we cannot afford that to happen to you. And this, of course, speaks to systems, right? So the question we would have is like, well, what is the system in which we are operating doing to care for the members that are caring for the people that come into its door? It must be a priority. I know that like that's just, just empty chatter, perhaps. But my longing is for you to be cared for, and yeah, I want to know where you work so we can call the chief of staff so that we can have the conversation about what we're going to do about caring for the people who are caring for the people in the ER. Because I think, Terry, what you said then really speaks to this directly. If I am having a regular infusion of this sense that like I'm being reminded that what we're doing right now, I'm not just caring for a person, but I myself am becoming someone in the caring of someone else. I'm like, God is turning me into somebody. It's not just what am I doing for God, it's who is he turning me into in the course of doing this that I have to keep in mind. And if I'm not being reminded that I am an artifact of beauty that is also emerging in the world, it will be easy for me to forget that that's what I'm doing for the people that I'm caring for.
Wow. Kurt, thank you so much for being with us today. It's such a gift. This has been a fast hour, and I could listen to you for many more. So thank you for joining us. We really are grateful. Everyone, thank you also for joining for this hour, regardless of what time zone you're in. And we really have appreciated your presence here today. And thank you for the questions that have come in the chat comments. Please join us again a month from now. 4 weeks from now, we'll reconvene for our next TMC seminar. That'll be on March 21st with Dr. Gozi Ezike on the title Faith-Based Safety Net Care and Advancing Health Equity. In the meantime, thanks again to Dr. Thompson. Blessings on your work, and everyone go in peace, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thanks, Warren.